Okay, so we're back again talking about what the example of radical voluntary sharing we read about in the book of Acts chapters 2 and 4 means for us. And the question we want to talk about is whether that was just a moment of enthusiasm that wasn't meant to endure, or if it's something that we as Christians should be taking a little more seriously. Does it say something about how Jesus expected his followers to live today?
I think it's hard for us in the 21st century, where everything, including faith, is seen in such an individualistic light, to get our minds around the idea that Jesus' teachings were intended for a people, plural. And that doesn't mean individual transformation isn't important. It's crucial. But it's meant to be in the context of a society or a community set apart. We see that in the way God originally set the Jewish people apart to be his people, starting with Abraham and later the covenant with Moses. And Jesus' work on earth is a continuation of that, to gather a people set apart. First to call the Jewish people, telling them that he was the fulfillment of the original covenant, but then broadening that to include the Gentiles as well, luckily for us.
Indeed. And it is very important to understand Jesus in his Jewish context. He was a Jew, speaking to Jewish people in that context. Very important. And these people then who answer the call to be set apart, they're meant to act differently. Their society is meant to look different from the world around them. They're meant to stand in contrast as a sign of what the world should be like, what the kingdom of God will be like, and how people are meant to treat one another. And that's what happened in the early church. It was meant to be a visible, concrete thing, not just a religious or spiritual community as we so often conceive of church. And the Sermon on the Mount shows us the things that will make this community distinctive. So the people in the community are going to seek peace with each other, even at expense to themselves. They're going to be completely chaste in their personal relationships. They're going to be ridiculously generous to the poor, giving everything they have, and to one another. And they're going to go above and beyond the call of duty without expecting remuneration, so going the second mile. They're going to love their enemies. They're going to give to the needy. They're going to dedicate their lives to God and not to accumulating wealth and possessions. You can only serve one master. And by doing or seeking to do these things, they're going to be a light for the rest of the world that people will be drawn to. And that's their missionary activity, right? It's being what theologian Gerhard Lofink calls the contrast society.
That sounds like a lot of pressure, but actually it's not. Because if you look at the Lord's Prayer, it's a communal prayer, not an individual prayer. It says, "Our Father, give us our daily bread, forgive us our debts, deliver us from evil." Also the admonishments against worry and the promise that whoever leaves family and property will receive 100 times as much in return only makes sense in the context of a set-apart community where there's care for one another and members are committed to one another. Now, a lot of people over the centuries have looked at the Sermon on the Mount as impossible. And there's been lots of ink spilled and speeches written attempting to prove that Jesus never actually expected us to live up to all of its demands. But I think that's just professional excuse-making. I think that it's wrong in the context of a community which allows itself to be ruled and transformed by God in all areas, and believers in the indwelling of the Spirit. Like it says, wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, there I am. It is possible. And I believe it's not only possible, but it is what Jesus meant when he said, "Whoever hears those words of mine and does them." It's the doing that's important, not the talking or the writing. And contrary to what you may think, or you guys watching this video, it's not meant to be a grim or even a heroic effort either. When you discover what can only be called the ideal society, it's something you're extraordinarily happy about and happy to devote your life to, even if there are inevitable mistakes and the human failures along the way, because we are fallen.
Right. Well, as the parable says, he bought the whole field for joy. It was not, a hardship. It was a happy thing. So back to the early church or the post-Easter church. The radical sharing, complete generosity, elimination of class differences was not just a one-time historical event and should not be dismissed as such. I believe it was the way Jesus' followers were meant to live, completely voluntarily, happy to give up property rights, money, in order to be part of something completely different. So just a small example of the way God intends people to live on this earth.
Right, and far from being a withdrawal in pursuit of a personal holiness, the early church was extremely active. They quickly spread out from Jerusalem and established new locations and drew in new people. Even hostile accounts of their activities speak about their extraordinary care of the poor, the widow, and the sick within and without of their faith communities. When the plague hit, it's reported that believers stayed with the sick and buried them, even though it meant getting infected and dying themselves, while the behavior of other people was above all concerned with self-preservation. Interesting in today's context.
Yeah, our plague.
Yeah,
today.
Gosh, ongoing. But there's that famous line from Tertullian, "See how these Christians love one another." I love that line. It's not hear how they love each other or read about how they love each other. It's see a lived example.
Right. And, if you strip away the overly familiar religious words, which, because they're overly familiar, they lost a lot of their meaning, what you see modeled in the early church is basically true friendship with God and with one another. Jesus calls his followers friends. And this is not friendship in terms of camaraderie, but it's friendship in terms of practical deeds of love and self-sacrifice in laying down their lives for one another. And that ideal of friendship was not a new thing, but it's an ideal that stretches back to antiquity. And that's going to be something we're going to be talking about in our next video, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, coming right up.
Anyway, so that's all we really have time for in this video. If you do have questions about this series or even things that you want to disagree with us about, we'd love to engage. Drop your comments below, and thanks again.